Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Repurpose Your Purpose podcast. I'm your host, Aurora Meneghello. Today, I want to do something a little bit different than usual and something that I hope will become consistent practice in this podcast. And that is, I am going to talk to you directly today. And please bear with me because it's a lot harder than, being in conversation with a guest. But I do want to talk to you about some of the things I have learned and I share with my clients. As you know, I have been working on my own as a coach for the past, I don't know, many years, but like quite a number of years now. And over time, my coaching practice has grown and deepened. And it's been interesting because in some ways, it's still true to the original insight that brought me to this path. And in other ways, I see now things in a more expansive and maybe accurate way. And I don't think my journey is gonna stop today. All right, okay, so enough about me. Let's talk about you. My calling really brought me to work with career changers. And if you're listening to this, that might be you. And what I mean by career changers, I mean people who get to the point where they don't like anymore what they're doing, or maybe they never liked it, or maybe life threw them a curveball and they cannot continue with what they're doing, all sorts of reasons. But essentially, these are career changers that find themselves not happy where they're at, but not knowing yet what is next. So, whether you are an employee, a freelancer, a business owner, a leader, I want to talk to you today in this podcast episode if that's where you find yourself. And for some people, maybe for you, this can even be called a dark night of the soul. It can actually be quite heavy. So, today I want to share with you what I've experienced myself, seen in my clients, as far as how this experience unfolds, and also what it might lead to. Okay, let's start from the beginning. And what I've noticed is that this not knowing what you want to do next often creeps up on you. In other words, maybe it's been going on for a while, maybe even years, but you were pushing it aside, thinking one day you would figure it out. Maybe you had a bit of a feeling, but it sounded in your head kind of crazy, like, no, everything, works well. Why should I complain about this? And so, again, you sort of convinced yourself that, you should just be grateful and happy and so forth, and you repressed the feeling that something wasn't working. And maybe something fell apart alongside a lot of other things. For some of us, when it rains, it pours. Sometimes that's what happens in life. It doesn't matter how you get there. What matters is where you are today. And if where you're at is a feeling of uncertainty, a feeling of not knowing, usually what I've observed is that we don't really know what to do with this feeling, and it tends to trigger more insecurity. So let me take it one step at a time. Even though we've all seen some sort of social media post that says, life is not, a straight line that goes like this, that goes up and up, it meanders and all that. I think for most of us, that's a really good idea intellectually. But in reality, we really expect life to go in the up and up. And when that doesn't happen, we feel there's a problem. Okay. The other good idea on social media is failure is good for you. You will learn, right? Again, that usually feels like a good idea, except when we are failing or when we fail at something really big. And then that's not a good idea. Then we get really caught up in a lot of feelings. So, the first thing that I want to share that really helped me and I see helps clients move forward is that life will have ups and downs, and some of the downs will be really deep down. And you don't have to be afraid. Now, it doesn't mean you don't have to be in pain, doesn't mean that you're not going to have a hard time. But I feel like that having a bigger perspective that in everybody's life, and remember, you don't know what's going on in other people's lives, okay? So even if it looks like to you a lot of people don't have this, I promise you they do. But it doesn't even matter because we're talking about your life. But as a wider perspective, life comes with some tough times for everybody. Even if you have the luckiest, best, most privileged life ever, it will come a time when you're old and people around you start dying. All right. So there's really no way to go through life without dealing and experiencing some loss, sadness, regret, um, difficulties, all sorts of things. This is the number one thing that all spiritual traditions, all religions grappled with, right? It's good to remember when these things happen that on one hand, you are absolutely can feel all your feelings, and it's okay if for a while you're lost. And on the other hand, to have a more what I call source perspective, like where you sit back in your wisdom and you realize and remember that, yeah, that's how it is. And in the big scheme of things, we're a little tiny, like one of my favorite authors, Michael Singer, says, we're a little tiny humans on this gigantic planet in a gigantic universe, right? So it's really good to remember that. So, what happens when you're caught up in a dark night of the soul? Well, let me say a little bit more about what is not helpful. The other thing that is not helpful is to pathologize that. Now, disclaimer, if you're gonna hurt yourself or others, please call 911, see a therapist, all of that. This podcast is not about that, right? But I think in current contemporary American culture right now, we're starting to pathologize any feeling that is not like, yay, I'm okay, I'm picking myself up again. No, it's okay. We all sometimes get caught up in feeling down, in feeling sad, in reacting, in being triggered. All of these things are human being things. And I think one of the most helpful things I've really learned and seen for myself is that there was nothing wrong in me having human being feelings and thoughts and reactions. Within, again, you don't want to hurt yourself or other people. So this is not a podcast about that. But I feel like being afraid of being human is something that will keep us stuck. And I really want to invite you to relax into that and see that you are made, I am made, we're all made to have these thoughts and feelings come through us and not to be, and there's nothing to fear, right? And in fact, it's the resisting them and repressing them and all that that creates problems. So said that, what are you to do? What happens when you're in this one, in this sort of a bit of a lost time or career dark night of the soul? So the first thing to understand is that, okay, the first step might be that you need some self-care and some healing, right? And that is not coaching. That might be therapy, that might be other healing modalities, okay? And that's like to carry you right at the moment. But then what happens after a while? Okay, so I really want to talk to you after a while. So something happened, you realize these feelings, you've been stuck a little bit. For some of you, it might be a few weeks. For some of you, it might be a few months or a few years, okay? And then it's time to move forward, to be present and to move forward. And this is who I work with. So what happens when we are in this situation, for all the reasons I just shared, is that we get some insecure thinking. And that insecure thinking come in specific flavors. For some of us, we start feeling we're not good enough. So we look at jobs or we think of business ideas, and our mind keeps saying, oh, I don't have that skill. I'm not good enough at that. It's too difficult. And, all versions of I'm not good enough. Some other people feel frozen by overwhelm, okay? Or they go blank. So it's like they can't even think about things. It feels everything is too much or there are no ideas. That's another way of reacting to this insecure thinking. Some other people will get into action and fall into a sort of dualistic, well, then I just need to get money. It doesn't matter what I want to do. And action, action, action. They'll burn out and they might find themselves again in like a stressed out situation, right? So essentially, they use action to cover up the problem instead of like letting themselves explore a little bit what's coming up. The another reaction, insecure thinking that I've seen, is the sort of like checking out of life. Well, I'll figure it out. So you keep drifting, not making money, maybe like doing self-development courses, and you're lost in this sort of like, oh, one day, or maybe you make up a story in your head that the money world or the business world or the working world is just not made for you, right? So these are all ways. I really want you to start seeing that these are all ways that we react to this insecurity that comes with the lack of clarity and the lack of knowing what we want to do next, because we're so taught that we need to know. And if we don't know, it's a problem. And we have to control everything we do. This is the central issue of why such a situation, the not knowing, provokes so much anxiety and insecurity and confusion and overwhelm and so forth. It's because we're not even aware of how much we think that we need to control and plan and know. And if things are outside of this, there's a problem. And then also the comparison. We're taught to compare ourselves, right, to other people, or to have this, by this age, I need to do this. By this age, this should happen. After this, it has to go up, all that kind of stuff. It's another form of controlling. So my invitation to you and to all my clients is always like, what if there was nothing wrong in not knowing? What if that was exactly where you are meant to be right now? That doesn't mean you're meant to be right now and forever, right? Doesn't mean that it's not okay for you to have some feelings about it. But what if there was nothing wrong with that? And so consider this. Consider that it might be the way you need to grow right now. That the way you need to grow is by losing some of that certainty and some of that reliance on ways of beings that so far have helped you, but maybe now they're stifling you. Okay, I'll give you an example. I work and I've worked with brilliant people who, for example, had great careers being in charge, being very direct, knowing what they wanted, all these kind of things, like very powerful, right? And sometimes what they need to get out of that uncertainty and getting lost a little bit, it's seeing that there's many more tools. There are many more tools in their toolbox, and being powerful is just one of them. And actually, being powerful right now is creating problems because they haven't looked at the other tools at their disposal. And sometimes the other tools are listening, understanding their own body and self-care, being more open to other people's ideas, right? Sometimes that might happen. Sometimes what I've seen is I start working with client that I'm thinking of a client, she really had lost all her, she had forgotten how powerful she was. This is almost like the opposite of the other example, but not really, because it's not the same kind of power. But she had forgotten that she had a voice and forgotten that she had something to give and to contribute. Okay? And this is something that I see often. It's really quite fantastic. And so we really work to open up that space of uncertainty, the space of change, that space that it's okay to be where you're at. And over time, I really could see like her light coming back, right? Her voice starting to express her thoughts, her passions. But it wasn't what it was, 20 years before. It was what it was now. Because again, she was going through her own transformation. And that's the other thing. Transformation is not a return to what you were before. A lot of the time, that's another thing that throws us off. We're a little bit older. We look back and we think, oh, when I was, 5 years younger, 10 years younger, 25 years younger, I used to be so brave, or I used to do this, or I used to be okay with risk, or, well, you're not, back then, you're now, you're right now. And you're perfect the way you are right now. What's happening is that something else wants to come through you, right? And if you get yourself out of the way, you will discover it. You will let it through. So what do I mean about getting out of the way? And I think this is another big thing. So when we start experiencing this insecurity, one of the things we do is we try to look for answers. And generally speaking, we look for answers in two different ways. One way is focusing on the self. Me. Our me thinking explodes. Look right now. Look how much time you spend thinking about yourself. Even when you think, when you're insecure, even when you think you're thinking about others, it's always me sacrificing. How do I get better? How can I make more money? Why doesn't anybody respond to my job applications? Me, 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 me. The me thinking explodes. That's not good. Okay? There are no answers in that direction. On the other hand, some of us, what we do, is we look for other people. Okay, so somebody will have the answer for me. Okay, like I get these calls, or emails quite often. Will you give me an assessment and tell me what I should do next? No, I don't know what you should do next. Okay, so we start looking for somebody else to tell us the answer because that's how we grew up as children, which in some cases for children might be appropriate, but we're not children anymore. So we're used to our parents telling us, we're used to teachers telling us, and then also, resent them, right? We blame them for telling us. So the me thinking or the other people will tell me, and then it's their fault if that doesn't work, right? So these are extremes that again are all coping mechanism because you're trying to get out of that discomforting feeling, but the discomforting feeling only comes from thinking that there's something wrong with you or with what is going on, but there is nothing wrong. So if you can again relax into this, what you can see is that discomfort is pointing to you actually needing to let go of whatever you're holding on as an attachment to the way you are or the way things are supposed to be. And when you let go, and look, this is not an idea I'm sharing. This I'm sharing because I've experienced it. I've seen people experiencing this. This is like a real thing. When you let go at a fundamental level, your experience transforms because you got out of the way, not your true self. You got out of the way an image of yourself that you formed over time and was helpful to you, but now is constraining you. And what emerges, I cannot tell you. You cannot tell yourself. There is no way for you to know ahead of time. And this is why all these things that we learn as good ideas, like life is meandering path, is not up and up, or failure is good for you, we think that if we know that, we can skip the pain. You cannot skip the pain. The pain is the point, right? If it was easy, you would not be bumping against anything that you were attached to. Okay, if I'm not attached to, I don't know, a teddy bear, I have no problem giving it up, right? So, okay, but have you ever had the experience of learning that an object you thought was so important to you, actually you can give it to somebody else? Or you can let go of, you don't need it? Doesn't that feeling come with a certain sense of liberation or love or peace or expansion? What you are being so attached to and holding on to is like an object. You've made yourself into an object in your mind. And the pain is pointing to that. Okay. And once we let go, that's the shift. But it's not something that, again, you can know as a good theory, you have to experience it. There's no way but through. So what I do is open up that space. And that space is where my clients start seeing something for themselves, and it comes through them, right? And out of that, the actions follow. And so this career stuckness, dark night of the soul, uncertainty, not knowing what to do, The first step is really to understand the nature of it, and that the nature of it is that there's nothing wrong with it. We make it wrong because something in our head tells us it shouldn't be that way, but that's exactly how it's supposed to be, right? The less resistance we give it, the more we can flow with it and let whatever needs to come through come through. And out of that, getting our image of ourselves out of the way, new possibilities appear, new ideas. We see some new ways of being. We see something. For some people, it's radical. For some people, it's radical. It's like, I'm gonna change my life. Like I worked with, you can see on my website, I have stories, right? But somebody who gave up, actually a couple of people who gave up being university professors. They had been all their lives, right? To pursue freelance work and work. One is a writer, one is a photographer that they loved, right? Radical change. Sometimes I've seen people now make actually the opposite, really understanding that what was holding them back in life was just themselves. They did not want to change careers. They had to speak up at work, or they had to change the type of environment they were working with, right? But it's the opposite. They were afraid of having to make a radical change, but they really didn't have to. Sometimes what happens is a feeling of freedom and a calling to more exploration comes through, or needing to sit in that uncertainty. Maybe the learning has to be longer for you. That's okay too. Right? We don't know. That's the point. That is the whole leading into this, is the not knowing. The more we try to control and rush through it and resist it and all that, and the more we get stuck like quicksand. You're supposed to not move. Right? Although in that, I guess somebody's supposed to get you out, so I don't know if that's the right metaphor, analogy, whatever, but you get the point here. So once you let that through, then you can align your action. The action you take and what you do will come from a different place. What do I wanna, what else do I wanna share with you? Because I think this might all still sound very, very scary. I think what I want to share is that it feels a lot better the moment you let it in, or accept it, or stop being afraid. I think that is really something so powerful, um, that you don't have to be afraid, and that it's quite instantaneous, that it feels better. The second thing is that it's very unlikely that you can do this completely by yourself. Now, sometimes people have a spontaneous revelation, but the reason why I do one-on-one coaching and a lot of the things I do are experiential is because this is not an informational kind of thing. It's not, I read a book, I do an exercise. Um, there's something powerful being in conversation with another human being that understands this process. It's a little bit like, I think somebody one time called me a career change doula or something like that, right? Or midwife. Like there's something about, it's like giving birth, okay? And since we're on that topic, uh, one of the things about, Socrates, this is, I'm totally taking an aside here, but I find it so interesting. So Socrates, pretty much the first, the very famous Western philosopher. I would say, right, there's some pre-Socratic Greek philosophers, but Socrates is really the one that is considered the first big name. And Socrates became famous because he had this way of talking to people that was about drawing from them their knowledge, their understanding, their answers, right? So it wouldn't give the answers, it would ask questions, and the people would see something for themselves, right? It would draw them forth. And there's a whole like system about this. Well, the interesting thing is that people always say, Socrates came up with this, and it's kind of true. But he said, according to the story, he said he actually was inspired by his mother to do this because his mother was a midwife. And he saw that when women were giving birth, his mother was allowing and supporting the woman giving birth in her own process, right? I mean, think about this. That time when you are in this liminal state in between what you used to be, what you used to do, what you do right now and doesn't work for you, and what you want to do or want to be or are transforming into, is a liminal state, a space in between. And just like giving birth, nobody can do it for you, right? But wow, having somebody there with you makes all the difference. So I forgot what I was saying about this. I got totally sidetracked. It's very difficult to record these things. But I hope you're still with me. Because I wanted to share some of the steps and what to expect. So you can't do this by yourself. You need some support. Okay. And then what happens is that it is not okay, now I was, scared and insecure and stuck, and now everything flows and no more problems. It doesn't work like that. Then we sometimes go a little bit back and forth, back and forth. We start moving forward, and then some insecurity comes, and then we start moving forward, and some insecurity comes. And the time it takes, it's your own time, right? But even that is meant for you, because the whole thing about life is to learn to deal with these feelings, with these thoughts we have, right? And so even that learning process is what will expand your capacity to be. So you don't have to be afraid. Okay, if there's one thing to take about this, don't be afraid, right? There's nothing wrong with you. There's nothing that is a sign that you cannot in life do things. No, it's all unfolding in the beautiful way it was meant for you. And for other people, it's meant different ways. It's your own, you have your own path. So I want to close this with a quote I often share from Joseph Campbell, okay, who wrote The Hero's Journey. Okay, so you enter the forest at the darkest point where there is no path. Where there is a way or path, it is someone else's path. Okay, so Joseph Campbell spent his life studying myths and stories from all over the world, and his theory, which some dispute, doesn't matter right now for this conversation, his theory was that all of these myths and traditions and stories from around the world were ways that different cultures used to point to the same process for everybody, for every individual, how to find your path in life. And his big thing was, well, there is no path for you, because we all have to, in some ways, create our own path, right? So don't be afraid and don't over rely on what people have done before. Now it's helpful to learn some things from people, like information type knowledge. It's good. You can learn from people that came before you, right? Great. We can learn from each other. But what we're talking here is the path of the spirit, the soul, something deeper, right? That wants to come through you. And that we all have to find for ourselves, or let emerge for ourselves. But here's the other part of that quote that really makes me laugh, what I love. It says, as you proceed through life following your own path, birds will shit on you. Don't bother to brush it off. Getting a comedic view of your situation gives you spiritual distance. and having a sense of humor saves you. So, as I wrap this up, don't remember to take this lightly. It feels so heavy because you're in it. But in a few weeks, a few months, a few years, you will look back. And maybe some of that heaviness in the memory will still be there, right? But you also will see that it was just a short period of time in your life. And you most likely have gained so much from it. This is the Repurpose Your Purpose podcast. My name is Aurora Meneghello. Find out more about me and the work I do with career changers who do not know what they want to do next on my website at repurposeyourpurpose.com.